Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 8th of March, comes to you from London. And the big news yesterday was Eurozone weakness. We saw announcements from the ECB on the likelihood that there won't be any interest rate rises till next year, and more stimulus. So we're seeing, as a result, the dollar strength kicking in there against the euro. So dollar looking very strong. Had a very big move yesterday. And that's taking us now to nudging for 2-year highs. So interestingly, we're seeing that dollar strength now really coming back and playing, and we'll have another upside target on this move that we saw yesterday once that column is locked, and then a move higher would activate that. But for the moment, it's looking like euro weak, dollar strong. And if we look at euro dollar, we see here that the euro actually fell pretty heavily yesterday. We see that big move down. So stabilizing this morning, but we've got these targets to much lower. We've activated a new downside target yesterday to 104, and we've got this long-term target below parity at 95 cents. So the euro weakness is a theme that we're seeing. It's weak on every chart against the dollar. Against the yen, the dollar actually is relatively weak. The yen being a safe haven. And so we are seeing dollar weakness there. So the dollar is strong generally, but not against the yen. The yen is stronger still. Sterling is lower against that stronger dollar, and looking more bearish there now. We're sitting at below 131. Yesterday we were a good cent or more higher than that, so we are pushing lower, and we are still bearish long term. Of course, everything awaiting Brexit, but we've got lots of downside targets here still, and that is a big concern. Against the euro, sterling actually is stronger, that weaker euro yesterday, so we are seeing that sterling actually is faring much better against the euro. So euro weakness is really very much a theme. Swiss franc, we're seeing sterling looking quite strong there as well, and against the Aussie dollar, fairly flat. Bitcoin, little change yesterday, still looking pretty flat. Just wandering into medium-term bullish. Got a lot of work to do to turn long-term bullish, though. So a bit of a basket case. U.S. Markets yesterday. This S&P 500 index was down 0.8%, and that's really clearly taken us into a bear trend on the short term. So we are now seeing, here's the weekly candle. This is obviously we're locked today, but we're seeing the first negative week for several weeks now since the recovery that we saw back at the end of with Christmas. So this was the rally. We're now hitting, might be cloud resistance here on the price, but we are through on the medium-term chart. It will be interesting to see how much of this move we actually retrace. But for the moment, we've got a downside target of about 1.8% lower on the S&P. The Nasdaq fell more heavily yesterday. It was down 1.2%, and so we are seeing here, and we've got a further downside target of 2% lower. Shortage of upside targets as well, which is a little bit of a concern on the Nasdaq 100. Looking at the Dow, we're seeing that selling off as well. So we are seeing the market unwinding some of the recent recovery that we've seen. And the Russell 2000 was first to show this up. So the broader-based market was actually falling a few days earlier. So we're seeing that showing up in the charts. We've hit the target there, and there's no clear downside targets from here. The futures this morning, the S&P future down 0.3%. The Nasdaq E-mini down 0.4%. So it does suggest the market's going to open lower, and unless we have some dramatic turnaround of buying in the US, this will be the first negative week we've seen this year. Taking a look at UK stock market, we see we're down just under 0.75% this morning, taking us back towards bearish territory for the Footsie. Looking at mid caps in the UK, we're down 0.7% and clearly bearish here as well. So now starting to see the markets unwinding. A shortage of targets to the downside. We've got one long-term target that's still hanging over us, but the mid-cap's not showing us really where they're headed. The DAX also just starting to crumble. We're starting to see breaking into negative territories, and the CAC 40 not quite bearish yet. It's the one market that's been relatively strong this past year or two. Looking at Japan, we were down 1.75%, so that's clearly bearish. The Hang Seng was down nearly 2%, and China was down 4.4%. So really, that big down day unwinding a lot of this rise. We're still bullish on these charts in the medium and long term, but maybe we're just hitting some cloud resistance here on that long-term chart. So interesting to see what we do next. We have effectively locked this upside target for a recovery for China. Now the big question will be, can we go higher and activate it? That will be the question. And also trade numbers out of China yesterday weren't so good. So the sentiment is turning quite bearish globally. We're seeing here the Sensex actually holding up relatively well in India, and the Aussie market was down just under 1%. So we are seeing a little bit of a change there. Brent crude is down 1.3% this morning, reflecting just global sentiment. We're weaker there. We're weaker, down 1% on WTI as well. So we're seeing some bearishness creeping in. US nat gas holding steady at $2.88. If we take a look at gold, with all this bearish sentiment hanging around, no big surprise that gold's now just starting to liven up again, and we're back into a bullish trend on the short-term chart. Not much of a buying thrust on this 60-minute chart, but it will be interesting now. We've got a downside target. We'll have an upside target here. Which way will we break? We've got this big pattern. That's the big question for gold. Silver, much the same as gold, just starting to poke its head through the 60-minute cloud. US 10-year yields weakened on that sentiment yesterday, down to 2.64%. So the outlook for interest rates is no rises in the medium term. And here we saw on that ECB announcement, German bonds just collapsed. So we saw that really big move yesterday in the Bund, and so bonds just collapsing on that. Taking a look at the individual stocks, that data was coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're a private user, Metastock Zenith. It's a brilliant global data feed. It's the same as the Reuters feed, but also Yahoo Finance provides quite good data here. So I'm looking at my daily charts for Yahoo Finance. Weekly 1%, daily 0.5% daily, and we see here the relative to the Dow this year. So the reading that I get at the end of the chart is telling me what the percentages are. So taking a look, first of all, we saw most of the markets down in the US. Europe this morning we're seeing pretty much lower, and Asia was pretty much lower all across the board. China, that real standout, down 4.4%. Taking a look at the Dow last night, where were the big moves? We can see here that there were only 4 stocks up in the Dow. Verizon was up 1%. Not quite bullish yet on the short-term chart. We had a lot down. Walgreens have actually been on the laggards board of late and are now nudging, making multi-year lows. So just testing that 2018 low, and we can see here that they've underperformed the market by 20% this year. So really looking quite a lot lower. Apple were down 2%. So we're seeing a little bit of a move to the downside there. Microsoft were down 1.2% in line with the Nasdaq. Still looking pretty strong on the long-term chart. Good upside targets, and the relative is really flat, so it hasn't underperformed or outperformed the market. But we saw yesterday we had some pretty big moves there. In terms of the Nasdaq, the big moves yesterday were Trip.com down 5%. JD.com, they were down significantly. They're down 4%. So we did really see some quite big moves. Amazon, for example, down 2.5%. So we're seeing the sell-off coming back to tech stocks. So it's really all a bit on a knife edge. Looking at the Aussie market, we had Afterpay Touch Group. They're looking amazing and often seem to be on the leaderboard. Super Retail Group were up 2%. The chart not looking great there. And Estia Health bucking the trend up nearly 2% as well. Maybe a bit of a recovery going on. On the downside, we had Infigen and Energy, they were down 6.5%. So recovery looking possible, but just seeing that these recoveries, we can get really big moves to the downside. Ardent Leisure also just struggling down nearly 6%. Zero Resources falling further. They're often in the laggards board. Underperformed the market so far this year by 27%. Taking a look at China, well, it was pretty well all down. Only one stock up 6%. Sanjian Optoelectronics, and that might well be a recovery. Quite an amazing performance in a bear market. So we saw here yesterday a lot of these security stocks that have rocketed lately. A lot of volatility here, 10% off on a lot of them. So quite key there. The Indian market, the leaders were NTPC up 4%. And Eicher Motors up 1.5%, but not enough to really change the chart here. And if we look at the downside, Wipro continuing to fall here. They've had a really terrible time since that big move several weeks back, and so they're in bearish territory now, clearly underperforming the Dow Jones by 25% this year. Tata Motors also lower, and we saw automotive stocks in Europe being hit yesterday. We'll have a look at those today as well, and Vedanta down as well. So a lot of the charts still not looking great, even though we have seen markets recovering. Taking a look at the Footsie, here we see the live prices coming in from Yahoo Finance. Straight away we go to the leaders board. Only a handful of stocks up. Fresnillo up just under 1%. Not a great looking chart. Bearish on both time frames. Glaxo, SmithKline also just struggling. Really has had no trend at all this last few years, and really we're seeing that we're just very flat on the relative, so no outperformance there at all. Hilke Pharmaceuticals, they're also up just slightly this morning, and Unilever up 0.2%. Looking a little bit better on that long-term chart. A lot of targets there conflicting, so quite a hard picture to read. Looking at the downside, GVC Holdings down 12%, so that's really falling, making new lows this morning. That's a terrible looking chart. We're seeing here breaking down, and we've got further downside targets here of 3, 4, 12%. We see the prices coming in here. I've got my system set to just bring the prices in every minute off the internet. It's quite cool. And NMC Health also lower, Antofagasta lower. So we're seeing quite a lot of move, and the financials looking pretty bad. Schroders, Prudential, Scottish Mortgage, Ordinaries Limited. So we're seeing here quite a lot of fallout there of financial stocks. Taking a look at the 250, we've got SIG Group up 10%, so they're really bucking the trend. That chart looking quite interesting on the medium term. We've got targets of 3 and 4% upside. Still got work to do long term. We've got Bodycote, they're up 8.4% this morning, so we're seeing some improvement there. We've got Contour Global up 1.2%. But on the downside, of course, we've got quite a lot. We've got Saga down nearly 6% this morning. That long-term chart not looking great. Ultra Electronics down nearly 4%. And CYBG Group, they're down 4% as well. So Funding Circle down nearly 4% too. And Acacia Mining down 3%. And looking quite good on that medium-term trend, but still has a little bit of work to do long-term. Taking a look at the top 50 stocks in Europe, we've got Orange Group in France up this morning just under 1%. They're bucking the trends. In Ireland, we've got CRH. They're up just under, 0.69%. The chart not looking amazing. Sanofi in France also looking a little bit better, just starting to poke through on the cloud. And Danone, we're seeing a lot of these French stocks sitting here, which is helping the French market looking more resilient. Danone looking quite good as well. Shortage of upside targets. There's some from a while back, but quite interesting there. We've got also we've got Air Liquide, a lot of French stocks in these leaders here. Here we see the live prices coming in, and Vivendi even, and that chart actually looking quite strong, breaking to new highs. On the downside, we've got Elisor, Luxor, and Paris. They're weaker, showing new lows there. We've got in Holland, we've got ASML. Daimler further falls this morning, down another 2%. BMW down nearly 2%, and Volkswagen down nearly 2%. So there's no let up for these automotive stocks falling away as we're heading to the end of the Geneva Motor Show. Quite interesting that we're still seeing the falls there. That's it for today. Until Monday, we're set to have a bad end to the week by the looks of things. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.